Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we've been reading a beautiful book of lately, The Soul by Rabbi Aiden Steinsaltz. Excellent work for sure. Rabbi Steinsaltz was chief rabbi of the Sanhedrin between 2004 and 2008. Definitely a modern-day Torah giant who went home to be with Hashem in 2020. I'm enjoying this book as well, Sheila. Excellent material. So, we want to cover some good ground today. So, let's get into it. We're on What Afflicts the Soul, but just to review a little from yesterday, we are born with the ego and also grow into it. As a result, many other inclinations are awakened within us. The soul's vulnerability is that whenever it is not sufficiently manifest, it becomes enslaved. Isn't that the case? This is a structural weakness we are required to resist, just as we are meant to struggle within the complex reality of body and soul. Setting limits and boundaries for the ego so that it does not turn our soul into a tool in the service of a foreign god is therefore a fundamental task for us all, and it is a struggle faced exclusively by the human race. Wow. So what afflicts the soul? Let's hope we got some great material here. Through our deeds, we can ignore our souls completely. We can act as we please, occupying ourselves with trivial things or important things, without the soul revealing its presence within us. In this respect, we can once again compare the function of the soul in our lives to body parts whose existence and functions we are unaware of until an ailment in one of them brings us to death's door. Every one of us suffers from pain related to the soul in some way or other, almost every day of our lives. Isn't that the truth? Severe anguish of the soul can result from personal tragedies, from an inability to withstand life's trials, or from confronting realities that hurt us in some way. These are the pains of the manifest soul, and all of this is part of what transpires in the soul at its most basic level, which, as you remember from chapter What is the Soul, is called the vital soul, or nefesh. These pains are unrelated to the deeper soul, or neshama. Nevertheless, pain that exists on the revealed nefesh level can lead us to an awareness of our neshama, or our deeper soul. This is because we tend to think about our souls only during times of personal or collective distress. This same syndrome exists on the physical level also. When we feel good, we don't think about our health. But when sickness strikes, we suddenly become intently focused on it. This situation is neither desirable nor necessary, but it is extremely common. The Bible often expresses the notion that problems are a means not only to awaken us from spiritual slumber, but also to help us reach a new awareness and even choose a new path. When we experience the soul's pain on a superficial level, we usually seek superficial solutions. Only when the pain becomes deeper and more internal do we awaken to a more profound awareness. Then, when we are able to contemplate the fundamental realities of our existence, we may discover that we have a soul and that it would be appropriate to devote some attention to it. The soul is not an ethereal abstraction. In general, it acts within reality and within a particular person. It seems logical to assume that the most basic fundamental plans of the soul are caused by the obstacles in its path to self-realization. Yet its self-realization is simple but profound, the achievement of closeness to Hashem. Of course, this pain becomes more intense and more disturbing when we fail to accommodate our soul's yearning for the divine, internally or in the world, and even more so when we do exactly the opposite. Any fault we display or any sin or transgression we commit inflicts pain on the soul. Since we aren't constantly aware of our souls, and moreover, since our souls do not act directly but through other channels and capacities, the soul's pain is not as obvious to us as our emotional and physical pain. We usually become aware of the pains of our soul through our nephesh and our consciousness. As a result, these pains do not usually manifest themselves in a clear way. They are concealed, and they penetrate our awareness indirectly, if at all. We can therefore suffer afflictions of the soul throughout most of our lives, perhaps sensing them in a roundabout way without identifying their source. At best, we may feel that something is off kilter, but never quite understand that the source of the pain is not in our bodies, our lifestyles, or our circumstances, but in our souls. Whether we are somewhat aware of the source of the pain or not, the result is almost always the same. We attempt to suppress it. Yeah, nobody likes to feel that way. We do many things that allow us to forget the pain within our soul, pain of the soul within us. For if our minds are free and our hearts are open, we may begin to feel that we have a soul and that the soul actually makes demands of us. Therefore, many of us feel the need to keep ourselves busy or entertained in order to avoid an encounter with our soul. How often does that happen? Yeah, people just get distracted with busyness. We are fearful of discovering it, but even more so, we fear the demands it may make on us. At times, we are able to escape this complex cycle in our lives, specifically when we reach a profoundly low point, which leaves us shaken and leads us towards change. Occasionally, inner healing, of which we are not completely conscious, occurs and causes us to listen to our soul. Sometimes people who had been running away from themselves for a long time become suddenly ready to accept the more lofty aspects within themselves, despite the fact that this is an extremely difficult thing to do. Very rarely, an inner revolution may occur, a sort of revelation when the doors of the soul open clearly before us. In such a case, we feel enlightened and are able to make meaningful changes in our lives with complete clarity of mind. It can happen that someone in a perfect mental and physical health, even someone who observes the commandments, has absolutely no awareness whatsoever of the soul within. This situation is known as dullness of the heart, or timtum chalev. Dullness of the heart has nothing to do with intellectual awareness or capability. Rather, it is a profound sense that the soul's light has completely dimmed. Dullness of the heart occurs specifically when someone is involved in holy matters that are meant to awaken the soul and reveal it, but no such feeling arises. There is no experience of elevation of the soul at times of supposed spiritual ascent, nor is there sorrow at times of spiritual regression. Yeah, a sort of, what do they call that? Indolence. Yeah, when somebody's indolent and their soul is dulled. This phenomenon can befall people at various stages of their lives or throughout their lives, is due to an ailment of the soul, but the true meaning of dullness of the heart is a kind of impermeability related specifically to the neshama aspect of the soul. Meaning that in matters related to the soul, every kind of feeling or awakening seems non-existent. A person suffering from dullness of the heart may respond to all sorts of external stimuli, desires, aversions, fears, but in matters of the soul, there is a barrier that makes it impossible for the soul to manifest itself. The concealment or apparent disappearance of the soul takes on other forms that are not always fully grasped. People often attempt to seek physiological or psychological explanations for them. This phenomenon is incredibly common but also extremely painful. And although it is often associated with depression, there are really no ready cures for this dullness of the soul. As we have seen, our souls can feel all kinds of pain in the context of our life experiences, but the soul suffers additional pains that are not intrinsically linked to our life processes and experiences. An individual's soul can also suffer the pain of the past. This includes the past within a single lifetime, as well as past incarnations. When the past is known to us, it is possible to see a coherent sequence that unites the events of our lives. About our previous incarnations, however, we seldom remember anything, yet this past is still attached to our individual souls. There are often transitions in our lives that seem to mean nothing. The events of the past, and even more so, the paths grow, and scars of the past make an indelible imprint on the soul. Personal history, status, wealth, and family background are peripheral in comparison. At times, we invent, with or without the help of psychologists, reasons for attractions, rejections, or other experiences unique to us from the annals of our particular history. Key life events can, in fact, be related to our deep past, but so can feelings that are far less significant, and either may generate our various attractions, revulsions, and fascinations, all without any obvious connection to anything within our current lives, even if they may perhaps be significant in the larger picture of the soul's experience. We can, in fact, carry a lot of baggage from past lives. We are not entirely aware of this baggage, and it acts within us in a concealed way that we cannot comprehend. At times, this pain becomes exposed when we experience a similar event in the present life and respond to it in a more extreme way than the current situation would warrant. This inherited suffering, which is generated in the unknown past, as well as in the immediate environment, can play a significant role in determining the direction we decide to take in life. We might, for example, end up following a path that is the continuation of the past we do not recall. More about past lives in a chapter called Reincarnation. Because these past events and experiences are usually unknown to us, we lack the wherewithal to rectify them. We can say only that we're making an effort to correct what we can in whichever way we see fit, whether we know and understand the issue or whether they are concealed. In our nightly prayers, we ask for forgiveness of sins, faults, and wrongs we have committed and that others have committed against us, and we express the intent to rectify our actions in the current incarnation and in other ones. We are meant to know only that within our own soul there are depths that may not be exposed to us during our lifetime, but despite this concealment, their influence is felt. Another type of pain of the soul can be called the pain of the divine presence. It's our ha-shekhinah. This pain is unrelated to our personal lives. It is the pain of the world, and since the world is filled with suffering, near and far, if you are a sensitive person, you are likely to suffer not only from personal pain, but also from pain that you are not responsible for and have no connection with. Such sensitivity is not unique to holy people or spiritual giants, but can be a part of the spiritual makeup of anyone. Yeah, empaths. Empathic oversensitivity. Most of us, however, usually react and are possibly taught to react more strongly to whatever is closer to us. The farther things are from us, whether geographically or emotionally, the less impact they have. The sages taught that in the verse, all the days of the poor are wretched, but the good-hearted have a perpetual feast, from Proverbs 15:15. The poor can mean someone who possesses a high degree of sensitivity. Such people will always encounter events that will cause them to experience pain. And since the world is replete with such events, their entire lives will be suffused with sadness. Ironically, the good-hearted have a perpetual feast. Possibly describe those who are devoid of sensitivity, but who are certainly happier in this world from the perspective of their own personal experience. In its broad sense, pain of the divine presence includes the entire range of pain, material or spiritual, profane or holy, in every facet of the world. Along these lines, the sages said, when a man suffers in the wake of his sins, what expression does the divine presence utter? I am distressed about my head. I am distressed about my arm. The all-encompassing existence empathizes with all the pains in existence. The pain of the divine presence encompasses all pain welling up out of the universe from the beginning of time. As an intellectual exercise, it is not difficult to imagine the totality of the world's pain. But as long as it remains on the intellectual plane, it does not constitute an emotional experience. For this reason, many scholars speak of the expectation that when we suffer personal pain, we will comprehend and feel it as part of the cosmic pain. The same principle applies to prayer. When we pray for mercy for ourselves and our loved ones, we should view our suffering and theirs as part of this cosmic pain, which is the pain of the divine presence, the pain of the collective soul of the world. In its essence, the human mind is meant to hold more than a collection of its facts. Isn't that a true statement? It is meant to contain information that creates attitude and feeling. Wow. When this is the case, then he who increases knowledge increases pain, from Ecclesiastes 1:18. Since such a person not only knows but also empathizes with the problems of others, those who feel the pain of the divine presence are holy, righteous people whose sensitivity expands and deepens the more they progress in holiness. It is also possible that an ostensibly ordinary person may genuinely sense communal pain, a pain that goes beyond the experience of the self-aware soul. This pain is a particular manifestation of the soul, which, the more it reveals itself, the more it opens up recognition of the other's pain, the pain of the stranger of the world. As we have already learned, we don't usually clearly perceive our soul. It does send us signs, however. At times, these messages are sent through the medium of pain, which is meant to be a warning sign of what is going on within the soul. At other times, these signs arrive through enlightenment, which demonstrate that there is a need for indeed another path. We should all take these lessons to heart, no matter where they lead us, in order to rise above the realm of sensory and bodily experience alone, and to actively pursue a more lofty direction. Yes, sir. All right, we're going to talk about death. Death severs the connection between the body and the soul. When the body dies, the soul leaves it. Since the body is a physical thing that is made up of material elements, we have a good idea of what happens to it after death, but we do not have a clear idea of what happens to the soul after it leaves the body. In many ways, not knowing where the soul goes is the most frightening part about death. However, even a living body is in some ways unknown, since it is always undergoing change. It develops and proceeds from one stage to the next, reaches a certain point of stability, and then changes again and proceeds to another stage. These changes are never as frightening as death, though not because of the change itself, but because death is irrevocable and unknown. Sadly, the dead are not accustomed to keeping in touch with the living and telling us how they are doing. So all we have to go on are a few hypotheses, dreams and fantasies. That it can be discussed at all is thanks to accounts of people who have had an epiphany that opened another world to them, a world beyond sensory experience. We know that after the soul departs from the body becomes a lifeless collection of material that is subsequently influenced by various natural forces. In the end, these materials are broken down into simpler components, as the Bible says, "For dust you are dust, and to dust you shall return," from Genesis 3:19. Dust is the last stage of body's decomposition. The soul, by contrast, cannot die, since the process of change and decomposition that exists in the physical world does not exist in the spiritual realm. The life of the soul after death is completely different from when it was part of a living person. Nevertheless, many sources from classical mythology to folk tales demonstrate that people tend to describe the soul after it leaves the body as identical to the once living person. After death, the soul departs from the material, tangible body. Nevertheless, for some reason, many of us assume it remains exactly the same as it was when it dwelled in a body, except that it has been stripped of its clothes, bones, and flesh. What remains after all this is a form that is described in many ancient and contemporary stories as a ghost. These metaphors and fantasies can be found not only in ancient mythologies, but also in various forms of the modern world, as well as in the imagination of multitudes of people of all religions. Some imagine the Garden of Eden as a place where we receive wings and a harp, or as a tantalizing place where people are able to fulfill all their bodily desires. While all these images of life after death are the product of superficial thinking, it is easy to understand why some people imagine the Garden of Eden as, say, an eternal vacation in the South Pacific. It feels good to dream that something like that awaits us after years of toil and often physical and spiritual pain. What could be better than a world devoid of disease, financial problems, and fear of death, that also contains rest, tranquility, and reunion with all our already departed relatives and loved ones? As we have said, all of these and other imaginary afterworlds have appeared in stories of folk literature all around the world throughout the ages. They are inspired not only by natural human desire for a soothing eternity, but perhaps more importantly, by an inability to apprehend the nature of the spiritual reality. There is, therefore, a powerful drive to ascribe material form to all spiritual matter. Yeah. Anthropomorphisms, that's a nasty habit of humanity. If, however, we are able to come to a more complete understanding of the soul as a spiritual reality, we must understand these descriptions as metaphors whose purpose is to reveal something to us about entities that are difficult to describe. The Rambam writes that just as one who is deaf from birth cannot understand what a sound is, and one who is blind cannot comprehend the concept of color, one who lives entirely in the physical world is incapable of comprehending the essence of spirituality. One of the basic points in a meaningful discussion of life after death is the question of what happens to the self. You will recall from the chapter titled "What is the Soul?" that this elusive entity called the self is the byproduct of a partnership between the body and the soul. Much that has been written about this is based on the reality of our lives in this world. However, after death, the soul is detached from the body, so it is also disconnected from the self of the living person. There's a unique point. Although it still carries some form of memory of the prior existence of the self. This explains certain experiences described by those who come back to life after having experienced clinical death. It appears that even though death severs the connection between body and soul, and by extension the self, the memory, including the memory of the body, does not immediately disappear from the soul. The soul had been attached to a living body which acted on it and was influenced by it. Inevitably, the soul absorbs something of its experiences with the body, so it is capable of suddenly parting from these experiences and ties. In the corpus of the Jewish mystical literature, it is said that for 3 days after death, after the death of the body, the soul is still hovering close to the body, so to speak, and does not completely separate from it. In short, the soul requires some time to accustom itself to its new situation. According to a number of traditional sources, the process of separation of the soul from the body is a product of the elevation of the soul. The higher the soul ascends, the weaker its connection to the body and the world around it becomes. At the early stages of separation, however, the soul retains its in-body experiences and memories. The soul's ascension involves processes in which all of life's experiences are distilled into their essential spiritual elements. Only after these processes are complete can the soul return to its original spiritual form. While several sources mention the notion that the soul may be taken on different paths in its journey from death to the spiritual world, depending on what the person achieves spiritually in life, it seems that all souls pass through distinct stages on this journey. After the soul departs from the body, it undergoes a process of rectification. The first stage of this process is known in the Kabbalistic literature as the hollow of a sling. Simply put, this is the most comprehensive overview possible of our lives in this world. It is similar to the old saying, when you die, your whole life passes before your eyes. While we are alive, our active memories usually don't include our entire life's course. There is a natural process of forgetting, meaning that even memories existing in the brain are not available to consciousness. Additionally, while we are alive, the memories in our consciousness tend to focus exclusively on certain flashpoints, whether of happiness or sorrow. In the hollow of a sling, by contrast, the soul, which is no longer connected to the body, apprehends the whole of its former life process at once. Indeed, this stage is commonly considered a stage of punishment, but its actual purpose is to bring the soul to a state of complete awareness. The soul acquires a certain comprehension of the details of the events that were forgotten or hidden during its time in this world. Because the various components of that lifetime are no longer relevant, the soul absorbs a more comprehensive sense of the entirety of its life while in the body. Only a precious few people can actually attain this bird's eye view of life in this world while still living in it. One such individual was King Solomon, who wrote in Ecclesiastes that old age and death render life's pleasures and achievements entirely meaningless. However, the hollow of a sling enables every individual soul to achieve this kind of view. Every soul that departs from this world sees its own life, and some might conclude that it was nothing but travail and vanity. From Psalm 90:10. Hard work mingled with sin that was devoid of purpose. Just as various values that had depended on physical life or social conventions become less and less significant after death. Other elements that in this life may have been perceived as unimportant take on new meaning and far higher value. In this world, we often consider our past and present in accordance with pain and pleasure, success and failure, but in a retrospective view, all that actually remains are the values that belong to the realm of the absolute. These values do not fade as time passes. On the contrary, they take on deeper significance. For example, asking how much a deceased person earned or lost in the stock market becomes pointless, while asking how much good she did becomes far more a fundamental question. The hollow of a sling view of life, which at times can be achieved only through several repetitions of the stages described above, is capable of creating a new and complete awareness. Only when we attain a memory that involves an evaluation of our lives can we move on to the next stages of the afterlife. Everyone goes through Gehenna, possibly quite willingly. Gehenna is often translated as hell, although both the original Hebrew and common translations have a myriad, not necessarily consistent connotations. For our purposes here, let's not call it hell. The punishments of Gehenna are meant to bring us to a state of purity. Throughout our lives in this world, our souls absorb life's events and are affected by them. Among these events are moments of enlightenment that the pure soul in itself would not have been able to reach had it not been connected to a body, because such experiences attach to the soul only through the kinds of tools the body can provide, such as worldly experiences. But while embodiment allows the soul to develop in ways impossible without this experience, damage is also inflicted on the soul through embodiment, which can be likened to scars left by evil. Gehenna is the state in which all these injuries are rectified and removed from the soul. The state of the deceased can be likened to one who removes clothing that has been worn for a long time and that is torn and stained. Just as it is ridiculous to say that when a garment is laundered, it is undergoing punishment for its sins, so too what a soul undergoes in Gehenna should not be seen as punishment, but as cleansing. Our sages add that the rigors of Gehenna are limited to a certain amount of time, but this can vary. There are individuals who have already completed the rectification of their souls, either fully or partially in this world. There are also those who, due to the magnitude of their flaws, require more extensive, deep rectification than others. It should be noted, particularly, that the flaw created by sin is not a result of the sin alone. In this world, there are punishments meted out in accordance with the sin, but in the ethereal world, all is measured in accordance with the flaw that the sin inflicts upon the soul. Therefore, the kind of person whose soul was on a low level could have committed many crimes in a lifetime, but the soul was not excessively harmed by them. On the other hand, the commission of even a small transgression could have caused great damage to a higher soul. This is because within human life, even a lofty soul is connected with and therefore suffers from everything that happens to a person both materially and spiritually. This does not refer to physical phenomenon, of course, since these no longer exist with a spiritual soul, but flaws that are somehow related to sanctity, that is, actions that negate sanctity or damage the soul. There isn't much in traditional Jewish literature that shows us what Gehenna looks or feels like, but in the wider world of folklore and legend, there is plenty, and it is embellished with elaborate descriptions and illustrations. But while these may be successful in awakening the imagination, they cannot be taken at face value. The soul, which is spiritual in nature, cannot be seared in fire or frozen in snow, for instance. So any description should be understood as a metaphor and representation, not as realistic depictions. When a soul completes the rectification process, it goes to the Garden of Eden. Both Gehenna and the Garden of Eden are often spoken of as locations or worlds. They do not, however, belong to the realm of geography or even physics. Gehenna is a place only in the metaphorical, almost mathematical sense of a platform or an infrastructure of reality to which the souls relate. So, the geographical or physical descriptions of Gehenna really refer to a state of being. The soul can reach a state of Gehenna and also a state of Eden, because human language and thought are confined to material metaphors and physical representations. We experience difficulty trying to comprehend these situations, let alone attributing emotional significance to them. This is why we use material imagery that is available to a person living within a body. You got to grasp that, the shortfalls in anthropomorphisms. In the Garden of Eden, the soul exists in a state of pleasure derived from the radiance of the divine presence. The pleasures of the soul does not relate to its existence, but is connected with and attributed to the deeds done by that soul in this world. Just as every soul can have weakness and can sin, so does every soul have connections with realms of holiness. Whether through performing a divine commandment, studying Torah, or experiencing the elation that stems from holiness. The soul can cleave to holiness as it is understood within our material world. However, in truth, we cannot comprehend the genuine sanctity to which the soul relates and connects, since it is far above the level of human understanding. Even a great person who performs the commandments with inner happiness and devotion, and not merely out of obligation, is limited by this material existence. As long as the soul is in a body, all of the soul's potential experience is limited to the body's receptors. In the Garden of Eden, on the other hand, the soul is in a state in which it can sense and understand everything that happened to it in this world. on the deepest of level. Any holy act performed in the world continues to exist on a spiritual plane, and since the soul is open and receptive, it takes pleasure in the radiance of the divine presence, or in other words, from the experience of everything it acquired and was preoccupied with in this world. Although the soul achieves an expansion of its potential to experience pain, pleasure, or pain in these abstract areas, it also returns eventually to its original essence in a certain sense, which is a static existence. In the Garden of Eden, the soul learns to and perceives anew what it understood little of in this world, and the longer it stays in the ethereal worlds, the more understanding it attains. However, the soul cannot fundamentally undergo additional changes. It's a key point. In other words, it cannot learn a page of Talmud, so to speak, that it never learned in this world, or observe a new divine commandment that it never observed in this world. There's elements missing needed to fulfill commandments, or observe a new divine commandment that it never observed in this world. And it is certainly incapable of repenting in the ethereal world. No more means to undo. Within the Garden of Eden, there are different levels, and the soul, while there, also discovers higher parts within itself. In other words, they didn't realize they had the ability. This is what is called the Kabbalistic literature the higher Garden of Eden. In order to progress to a higher level, the soul must undergo additional rectifications and modifications. The process of rectification and removal of flaws that took place in Gehenna purified the soul enough to enable it to achieve the experience of the lower Garden of Eden, but not enough to rise it to higher levels. This is similar to the phenomenon in our world where the process of repentance are multi-leveled, and those that are sufficient for one level are insufficient for another level, just as one would not require the same level of cleanliness for a dinner plate and an operating room. That's a unique analogy. The process that the soul must undergo in order to reach successively higher level is referred to as the soul's passage through the river of fire. All this demonstrates that the existence of the soul in the Garden of Eden is not completely perfect. Neither, isn't that relieving? Neither with regard to the ultimate purpose of the world, nor with regard to the purpose of that particular soul. Additionally, even when the soul experiences pleasure in the Garden of Eden, that pleasure may be inhibited by its not having completed its role in this world. Such roles will not reach completion until all the tasks allotted to that soul have been performed. In such cases, that soul needs to be reborn in the world so that it can complete the task it did not accomplish in its previous lifetime. Additionally, there are very great souls that have already completed their tasks but still return to this world, not for their own sake, but because others are in need of their tremendous enlightenment in order to perform their own tasks. Finally, neither Gehenna nor the Garden of Eden provide a complete reward or punishment. When we are alive, our existence is composed of a soul and body, and a conscious self between the two, as we have seen. The rectifications that take place in Gehenna and the Garden of Eden are relevant only to the soul aspect, not to the self aspect. This is why we believe in the resurrection of the dead, which will occur at the end of days. The purpose of the resurrection of the dead is to reconstruct the connection of the body and soul in a more complete manner, in which both will undergo a certain measure of rectification and enhancement, but will return in principle to their previous form. Only then can the great judgment take place and the true spiritual reward be given. All right, on reincarnation. Every human soul is given a specific role in the world. It could be said that each of us is allotted a plot of land in the world to cultivate and keep. See Genesis 2:15. Every soul is required to fulfill the unique, specific role apportioned to it. Only then will it be entitled to rest. For all sorts of reasons, obstacles, delays, personal choice, failure to perceive our role, many of us do not manage to completely fulfill the soul's mission during one lifetime. A soul that has not fulfilled its role completely and that has even harmed itself and others in the process is sent back to the world in order to complete the task allotted to it. If it doesn't manage to finish its task the second time, it will be sent back again for as many times as it takes. This return is referred to as reincarnation or Gilgul. Although usually a soul is returned to the world for the purpose of completing its unfinished task, occasionally it may be reincarnated for another reason, because either the world in general or a specific individual is in need of that particular soul's contribution. You don't realize how valuable you are. A soul that returns to the world through reincarnation does not necessarily return with the same self as before. As we have said, a self is not a function of the soul alone. It depends on the connection between the body and the soul, and between both of these and the environment, as well as the time and place in which the soul is living. A reincarnated soul has a new body and a new flesh and blood parents, and it lives in a different place at a different time than the previous incarnation. All of these factors create a self that is different from the original one, despite the fact that it is the very same soul as before. The entrance of the reincarnated soul into a new body therefore means a new beginning and a new life experience for it. Most of the time, the soul does not drag its prior memories, consciousness, and knowledge along with it into the new body. All of these components of the soul's last tour on earth are not evident at all. There is, however, a vague aspect of memory that accompanies the soul in all its reincarnations. Despite its vague nature, the memory of its previous incarnation gives rise to a number of influences that affect the soul in its newly embodied state, which we could call its new spiritual self. Thus, although the newly embodied soul doesn't exactly know how it behaved in its previous incarnation, it has a tendency to complete the parts of itself that had not been completed previously. For example, a soul that did not fulfill its duties regarding Torah study and other divine commandments, or other roles and obligations in its previous incarnation, will have a strong tendency to perform specifically those acts in the new one. The newly incarnated soul may not even understand this attraction. The deeds it is attracted to may not necessarily be intuitive, given that the soul's new surroundings. Similarly, the soul experiences a vague memory of other souls. Souls that were close to one another in a previous incarnation will also be attracted to one another in the new incarnation, although on a conscious level they will not understand the reason for this attraction. This is why those who were relatives in previous incarnations will feel a special connection to each other in another incarnation as well, even though at present there are no family ties between them or any other overt connection. Events that occurred in one incarnation can influence life in another incarnation. Experiences that cannot be clearly explained in the present life may be ramifications or completions of another life. In this vein, you could suffer much pain that has no connection to your deeds or way of life in the present. A person who is born with a deformity or whose life is replete with death, loss, and so forth may believe that this suffering is an inexplicable injustice. But in reality, it is a way for the soul to atone for damage it caused in a previous incarnation. Even someone whose life is not filled with suffering should pray for the ability to rectify in the present life the damage done in previous incarnations. Such a prayer appears in many prayer books. At times, a full soul reincarnation occurs, meaning that the whole soul enters another body. But that is not always the case. Parts or components of a single soul, or a different parts of several souls may return to our world as one soul that appeared to be new, but whose basic components have existed before. Sometimes souls split into several parts, referred to as nitzotzot, sparks, or shards. Each shard is an expression, a kind of clone of one soul, and they appear in different souls that find themselves within different people. People whose souls share shards from the same source are part of one soul, but in their present form they are distinct individuals. When they encounter each other, unique connections may be formed between them that often cannot be explained in terms of their manifested personalities. For example, a friendship based on a bonding of souls can be formed between people who are completely different from one another in every aspect of their revealed personality. It is a bond that frequently appears spontaneously with no warning or introduction, but is born of an inexplicable sense of belonging. This phenomenon exists to an even greater extent among souls of distinguished individuals, whose sparks appear within a large number of people, often throughout many generations. For example, it is written in the Zohar that in every generation there is a manifestation of the soul of Moses, our teacher. Thus, such souls appear in every generation, not in their full intensity, but as shards within different people, each of which has some characteristic of that original great soul. Our great masters of the soul attempted to trace the earlier reincarnations of the soul in order to help people understand the unique obligations and tasks related to their particular souls at present. In the reality that is accessible to us, we cannot normally choose among numerous paths, and we do not always have sufficient inner clarity to guide us to the path or paths we are required to take. Our revealed reality has many limitations that can cause our choices to be affected by factors that have nothing to do with our true destiny. Indeed, many people choose their path according to their education and environment. However, this kind of choice is frequently erroneous and may cause us to feel, perhaps without understanding why, that we are in a place where we don't belong, that we are treading on a path that is not ours. This type of emotional distress is one of the subtle ways the soul tries to relay to us the message that, to a greater or lesser extent, we have strayed from the path that our soul wishes to follow. We may continue to follow the path that our current consciousness prescribes on us, or instead we may wander from experience to experience on life's journey. Either way, these sensations are the result of listening to the soul's veiled message about what it is meant to do in this life. However, because these messages are not obvious and have no explanation that is accessible on a conscious level, they may cause disquiet and give us a sense of emptiness or lack of fulfillment. Listening to the soul is not an easy undertaking. Part 3. Dreams. Dreams are among the first thing we identify as distinctly spiritual experiences. It is through our senses, on the other hand, that we apprehend external reality, that is, things that act and exist outside of us, and it is clear to us that these apprehensions are external to us. So while there is plenty of confusion in distinguishing the nephesh from the self, dreams are a different story. We perceive our dreams as their own distinct reality. We do not view our dreams as part of our self. Furthermore, we perceive them as something different from our experiences of the outside world. This recognition of dreams as a unique state of existence should not be taken for granted, since the recognition itself is the result of self-guided observation. Small children do not distinguish dreams from the other experiences in the world. Only later do they learn to define them as dreams as distinct from reality. On a philosophical level, the distinction between dreams and reality is not at all simple. In the opinion of some contemporary philosophers, there is no unequivocal way to differentiate them. What's more, there is no actual way to prove that our entire lives are anything other than a continuous dream. However, if we can put philosophy and theory aside, there are a few ways to distinguish the two. One characteristic difference between dreams and reality is that dreams lack consistency. In dreams, especially long, complicated ones, there is no set structure for moving from one episode to another or from one experience to another. One of the most common dreams involves falling, but these dreams do not subsequently show the dreamer his broken bones on the ground. The same goes for dreams about flying, in which the dreamer stops at a certain height and starts walking. It could be said that all dreams are fragmented and not consistent in any way. Another distinction is continuity. It is unusual for us to dream in continuous episodes, while in reality the events we experience are usually consistent and continuous. Furthermore, dreams, unlike reality, contain all kinds of implausible elements. They include shapes, images, and events that are completely irrational. At the time of the dream itself, though, these things all seem normal. Considering the huge number of dreams each of us experiences, not to mention the sum total of human dreams, we might wonder if there is a common component to all dreams. It appears that one characteristic can be identified. When we are awake, we have control over our thoughts. This control serves as a kind of filter and that distinguishes fact from fiction and matters we wish to think about from those we do not wish to think about. But in our dreams, this control mechanism is deactivated, and this awareness does not exist. When, for example, Joseph dreamed that other sheaves were bowing down to his sheaf, or that the sun and the moon and the stars were bowing down to him, from Genesis 37:5-9, the question of how these things could happen most probably did not cross his mind. Only later, when he woke up, could he possibly have been puzzled by this. So the most basic control mechanism, which is absent at the time of the dream, is distinction between reality and fantasy. For this reason, even in the most banal dream, which can seem like a normal part of life, the dreamer does not know that it is not really happening. There is, likewise, no control mechanism governing events or scenes that could never occur in real life. Since the dawn of humanity, we humans have attempted to comprehend the meaning of dreams. There are dreams whose meaning appears to be simple, such as when the dreamer sees something he wishes for as if it were really there. This experience is reflected in the verse. It will be like a hungry one who dreams he is eating, then wakes when he is still hungry, and like a thirsty one who dreams he is drinking, then wakes and is still thirsty, from Isaiah 29:8. This is why Joseph's brother claimed that his dreams reflected his thoughts when awake. They were not blaming him for his dreams, but for the thoughts he was thinking while awake. Indeed, when the dream is clearly a reflection of matters that we think about or desire or are afraid of when awake, we do not usually need another person to interpret the dream, since the explanation is obvious. As our sages said, a person is shown in a dream only the thoughts of his heart when he is awake. Whether the dream appears as a repetition of something the dreamer experienced while awake, or whether it appears in a more colorful, extreme way, it is still an example of a straightforward dream. On the other hand, there are dreams that people are unable to comprehend. For example, we may see things in a dream, possibly even simple everyday things that we have never thought about before and may not have been aware of, or familiar objects in unfamiliar shapes or combinations. The interpretation of dreams is based chiefly on the assumption that what we see in a dream is symbolic, and these symbols require explanation. Occasionally, dream interpreters, whether in biblical times, in the time of Joseph, for example, or during later historical periods, such as in the time of the Talmud, interpreted dreams according to a list that enumerated symbols and their meanings. In this sense, Talmudic dream interpreters and modern-day psychoanalysts, who may receive handsome compensation for their services, are doing the very same job, even though they are not using the same dream interpretation manual. So where do all the images, events, and scenes in the dream come from? There are dreams in which the source of the metaphors and images is clear, such as those containing memory fragments, a duplication of details from the reality that were not completely erased, or a repetition of past events or anticipated future events. For example, when we dream of placing an object in a certain place, then wake up and go look for it there, only to discover that it was just a dream, there are dreams in which hopes are visualized as reality, and there are dreams about desires. There are dreams that result from an obscure awareness of a certain physical action, such as flying or falling, and there are dreams that end when we hear some sort of noise, an alarm clock usually. But none of these can explain the plot of the dream, or how and when it was created. Indeed, most dream interpretations relate to some sort of climax in the dream, but they do not explain how the dream reached that point. In this regard, it could be suggested that many dreams consist of a sort of literary composition that weaves a certain plot, one that is not necessarily related to the main point of the dream. Including it in this category are different types of nightmares that express our fears. These, too, often involve a complex plot that includes a certain sense of fear, whether it is obvious or obscured, presented in an intricate literary fashion. Most dreams can be included in this category. Ignoring the convoluted storyline, they often repeat its fundamental preoccupation. There are other dreams that are pure and idyllic about lofty matters or abstract ideas, but these, too, provide a means of expression for a soul that lives on a higher plane when we are awake. In dreams of this type, people can solve problems such as chess or math problems that they toiled over unsuccessfully while awake. There are many stories like this in the memories of mathematicians and scientists. We can certainly add to this category the dreams of holy people who dream that they are in a house of study or in the company of God, where they are giving sermons or coming up with new interpretations of the Torah. Testimonies of this type of dream appear among the writings of many people, and some of those novel Torah interpretations constitute valuable material that may even be considered authoritative in an objective sense. An entirely different type of dream, which is usually less common, is the revelatory dream. These dreams range from minor revelations, for example, when people dream about events that took place in distant lands and that they had no way of knowing about, such as the death or illness of another person, to revelations concerning plans and events of great significance that are indeed realized at a later time. This type of dream frequently appears in the Bible. It follows that although most dreams can be explained simply as continuation of our waking thoughts, and sometimes as reflections of thoughts that are not entirely conscious, there are other dreams whose source appears to be beyond the one who dreams them. Our sages say there are dreams that come through an angel and dreams that come through a demon, meaning that there are dreams whose source is an external spiritual force for which the dreamer serves only as the conduit. Such dreams are not necessarily holy. They can come from the other side, from a place of evil. The phenomenon of dreams originating in an external source is mentioned in the Bible as well, where a distinction is made between heavenly revelations in a dream, as when God describes himself as speaking to prophets in a dream from Numbers 12:6, and revelations that occur in wakefulness. Furthermore, as both the Bible and the Talmud indicate, even an authentic revelation is somewhat distorted when it occurs in the form of a dream, both with regards to its clarity and to its truth. Since the dreamer is, by definition, in a specific mental state, he processes the content of his revelation in a certain way. This could be by adding details that are unconnected to the original revelation. As is expressed in the Talmud, it is impossible to dream without idle matters, or by omitting details. In the waking revelation, things are clearer and less subject to human involvement. The revelation works like other visual or auditory experiences in reality. The prophet Jeremiah speaks of this when explaining the difference between a dreamer of dreams and a prophet receiving a prophecy. Jeremiah uses a metaphor to differentiate these two types of revelations. The words of the dreamer are compared to a mixture of straw and wheat, while the prophet's waking revelations is likened to pure wheat. Even if dreams can be attributed to various extrinsic factors, they remain in all their forms an inner experience occurring within the nefesh. Some dreams exist solely within the lower levels of the nefesh, having no obvious connection to the external stimuli. Others belong to parts of the nefesh related to absorbing external sensations. Some dreams take place in the higher levels of the nefesh, namely in the areas of desire and aspiration, and some may even be found on the level where the nefesh creates new structures and images, some of which are prosaic and some of which are fantastic. Only exceptional individuals who have focused and trained their nefesh extensively can reach the level where all of their dreams are clear and illuminating. This is because during sleep, we have no control over the levels of nefesh that are active. So we may see things in our dreams that come from the dark cellars of the nefesh. But such an experience may produce an even higher revelation of the soul itself. Since the soul is of a lofty essence, it is not limited, as the body is, to matters it understands through study or that it has registered through the senses. It can reveal to us information that is distant from us, either in place or time, and that we would not have direct access to when conscious. Thus, some people are able to see things in their dreams that are far beyond their own reality. A dream like Jacob about the ladder set up on the earth and the top of it reached to heaven from Genesis 28:12 is a dramatic instance of a revelatory dream. Since it is a dream, it does not manifest itself in an abstract way, but appears in forms that the nefesh can comprehend. The good and evil inclinations. One of the greatest difficulties the human soul has to contend with is the constant struggle between the good and evil inclinations. This is not merely the subject of fascinating stories about the extraordinary events in the lives of great people, or complex novels about those whose entire lives consist of such struggles. At face value, it appears that no human being is free from internal battles, which can mostly be categorized as conflicts between good and evil. Additionally, people differ from one another in their level of awareness of this issue. Some are hardly aware of their struggle at all, while others are highly aware of them, and consequently the story of their unfolding is a significant part of their inner lives. Works that deal with religious and spiritual matters relate to this issue in various ways. Some relate to evil or various temptations as nuisances originating from outside the person. Their basic assumption is that God made man upright from Ecclesiastes 7:29. This is to say that human beings in general are essentially good, even though there is not a righteous man upon the earth that does good and never sins, from Ecclesiastes 7:20. The assumption remains that most people are not only the perfectly righteous, follow the path of good most of the time, and if they commit evil is due to external circumstances or exceptional aberrations from within. An alternative view is very different. Human spiritual life is the embodiment of inner struggles, and the entire life process of the nefesh is a saga of the clash between good and evil. Indeed, there are many parables about ways to overpower the evil inclination. Yet another perspective, such as that of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi in his work the Tanya, views this struggle as equivalent to the total life process, one that includes ups and downs, victories and defeats on both sides, and where there are seldom unequivocal resolutions. The different approaches to understanding the struggle of inclinations within the human heart may result from different definitions of the good and evil inclinations. What then is the good inclination, and what is the evil inclination? In the following paragraphs, we will discover some of the themes in the primary traditional approaches to this subject. According to one worldview, there is a morally correct path that is straightforward and obvious. Everything that is considered a diversion from this path, no matter what the circumstance, is considered evil. This opens a question regarding the evil inclination. What causes us to do bad things when we are able to act morally? The standard answer is that acting immorally is a mistake, the result of an external obstacle or a momentary or ongoing submission to a powerful attraction that causes us to depart from our chosen direction. This approach is not just an abstract view, but a framework for practical guidance. If we persist in following the correct way and don't attempt to find shortcuts or occupy ourselves with pursuits that we shouldn't involve ourselves in, we are guaranteed to continue on the good path, and our struggle with the evil inclination will be minimal. This is the source of general advice to follow the middle road, also called the golden mean, by many masters of Musar, the literature of Jewish character refinement. Any departure from this path, whether in actions or thoughts, is perceived to be dangerous or even bad. The following verse from Proverbs may read in this light: "Do not give me poverty or wealth, feed me my allotted bread," from Proverbs 30, verse 8. The pressure of poverty may provoke a person to do negative things. In the words of the scripture, "Lest I become poor and steal," from Proverbs 30, verse 9. Although justification can be found for these acts, they are still morally problematic. On the other hand, wealth not only opens many possibilities, but fosters excessive pride, which can also lead to evil. In the words of Scripture, "Lest I be sated and blaspheme, and say, Who is the Lord?" Consequently, we are better off on a middle road, since that is where the probability of committing evil is the least. This perception is not limited to the material aspects of life, but to development of the nefesh and character traits. For example, the moral approach of the Rambam determines that we should not be extreme with regard to any characteristics of the nefesh, since the extreme may be bad, whether in its own right or because it will serve as a foundation for evil that will appear later on. This philosophy may also be relevant to our intellectual understanding, such that even if we are all ignoramuses, we should nevertheless not strive to be excessively wise. Taking this idea to an extreme, King Solomon, who authored the book of Ecclesiastes, is not satisfied with advising, "Do not be overly wicked," from Ecclesiastes 7:17, but also says, "Do not be overly righteous," in verse 16. Each of these extremes is itself an invitation to do evil. Yeah, and I find I've met enough people extreme in the opposite direction and don't realize the infliction they cause on others. Like I mentioned, toxic positivity. When somebody's overly righteous, yeah, they become showy and unreal. On another level, this conception of good and evil parallels our physical characteristics. Because of our physical nature, we can exist only in certain places and in conditions that support the needs of our bodies. Temperatures that are above or below a narrow range won't work for us. If temperatures are too high or too low, we will suffer anything from mild discomfort to extreme pain and even death. Our sensory organs, and through them the perception of sounds, sights, and specific sensations of pain or pleasure, have a circumscribed range beyond which we can perceive nothing at all. We can therefore maintain overall health only within specific limited range of conditions and stimuli, outside of which lies danger or oblivion. It follows that the middle road, both in body and in soul, is not merely pleasing but also right and good. The good path is like a line leading us safely from one point to another, while the evil inclination is a general term for anything that causes us to deviate from this line. The evil inclination is therefore perceived as the common denominator of all that is abnormal. Basic human nature is perceived here as essentially good and healthy, while every departure from it is considered symptomatic of an illness, which, like a physical illness, is sometimes caused by external factors that are beyond our control, and at other times stem from a weakness, inborn or otherwise, or in our normal functioning. But even those who believe that mankind is basically morally upright and well-adjusted are aware that various obstacles stand in its way. At one extreme is curiosity, which leads us to places where we shouldn't go, and at other is laziness, which prevent us from doing what we should. Temptations also arise from time to time. These are essentially normal components of human nature that sometimes, for one reason or another, become stronger than usual, which allows us to diverge from the straight and narrow path. But the natural path of a complete, healthy person is the good inclination, while the evil inclination, in all its forms, consists of the entire range of possible flaws. It follows from this philosophy that if humankind were completely sound in both body and soul, and if we lived in a world mostly devoid of problems, that in itself would be the definition of what is right and good, akin to man's existence in the Garden of Eden, when we were still unsullied by sin and in complete equilibrium with our environment. This description of the human personality, which sometimes serves as a basis for education, is optimistic and creates a sense of complacency. Most of us are simply not built like this. Our personal experiences are far less tranquil. For most of us, the struggle with inclinations is not a rare occurrence, but is descriptive of our entire life. And not only people with spiritually elevated souls fight the temptation of the evil inclination while striving to reach heights of sanctity. These struggles are experienced daily by almost everyone, regardless of moral or religious character. Such struggles are also not a function of age or social status. They may appear even at a very tender age in various forms, and despite the changes we undergo later in life, along with changes in our inclination, it seems that they continue to exist even in old age, sometimes until our final moments. Consequently, alongside the above descriptions of evil and the evil inclination as marginal phenomena that only incidentally find themselves in the area of normative life, there are characterizations that paint a completely different picture. As early as the book of Genesis, the Bible offers a markedly pessimistic summary of the human condition. For the inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth, Genesis 8:21. From here, it goes on to describe an existence characterized by struggles with the evil inclination and discussions of these struggles. Our sages ask an interesting question. At what point does the evil inclination enter a person? Does a fetus have an evil inclination? Is it activated immediately at birth or later on? Jewish literature contains many discussions on the evil inclination and descriptions of its manifold facets. The Talmud, for example, states that the evil inclination has 7 names and describes the tremendous difficulty involved in the battle against it. As our sages say, a person's evil inclination overcomes him daily and seeks to kill him. As it is stated, the wicked watches the righteous and seeks to kill him, and if not for the Holy One, blessed be he who assists him, he would not overcome it, from Psalm 37:32. This view is certainly not optimistic, but this theme is abundant in the sources. In general, we can divide the evil inclination into 3 main categories: desires of the human body, desires having to do with character traits and other aspirations that are not physical, and the drive to do evil for its own sake. Physical needs and desires. The first type of evil inclination, which is frequently perceived as the central one because it is present within all of us, is made up of desires that are essentially bodily impulses. The human body is in essential no different from the bodies of animals, so that most human desires and passions are not necessarily related to the human condition and are not unique to it. Instead, they are intrinsic to the makeup of the body. The body has objective needs, such as eating, drinking, and sleeping, as well as physical systems that signal periodically that these needs must be met. We can fulfill these needs minimally, but there is a limit beyond which life is no longer possible. So we can't ignore these needs and continue to live, even if we may wish to ignore them. Various worldviews, and even some schools of morality within Judaism, assert that the very existence of the body is the source of evil. But physical needs, which are part of our basic natural makeup, cannot truly be defined as evil. The evil inclination can be described as a deviation from the normal process of satisfying our needs and desires, resulting in damage to both body and soul. Our natural inclinations and desires are extremely powerful. Their power is generated by the interaction between the physical need and the spiritual emotional aspect associated with it. It is evident from observation that the purely physical part of these desires is much smaller, both quantitatively and qualitatively, than the emotion that accompanies them. Animals do not fulfill their inclinations unless a physical need arises, and when they reach satiation, they stop. Human beings, on the other hand, also have a nefesh that has its own needs, and the human nefesh can awaken aspirations and desires that do not come from a physical need, but are a part of the human capacity to think and imagine. This is why these desires are capable of growing, becoming complex, and even distorted. Unlike animals who eat only when they are hungry, human beings are capable not only of imagining food, but of awakening within themselves an appetite for lunch that will not be served for another 3 days or even months later. Human thinking, therefore, creates a great expanse for material desire and causes it to loom large in our inner world. These differences among people with regard to their characters, their habits, and their education are also reflected in how much room they give to their various passions. For example, eating has no emotional connection to memories from the past, while others devote long hours of thought and preparation to the meals they are about to eat or to recollections of past culinary experiences. Shalom, Ashley. The same goes for the other desires, some of which loom larger within the nefesh than in reality, whether in dreams, yearnings, or memories. In all cases, the desire originates in the physical material side, which is essentially limited, but it extends from there to the spiritual side, where it can expand and grow endlessly. Indeed, the human nefesh is not satisfied with the fulfillment of its needs at the most basic level. In every culture, the same object of desire that are fundamentally simple become more and more complicated. Again, taking the culinary element as an example, people do not eat just to live. Eating becomes a meal, then a festive meal, then a feast. People are constantly creating new ways of fulfilling a single basic need. A gourmet meal is not merely a few basic foods eaten absent-mindedly, but a complex structure in which a great deal of creativity is invested and about which many books have been and continue to be written. Discussions are conducted about such meals before their preparation and afterwards, and much time and money is invested into them. The nefesh empowers, increases, and develops the basic physical need for satisfying the body's deficiency and adds a component of pleasure at ever-increasing levels of intensity. Add to this the human inclination to decadence, and we not only develop an entire culture of food, but we arouse and intensify senses by using additional items. Spices, for instance, have nothing to do with satisfying basic needs. Think about that. Spices by nature intensify the desire to eat. The greater the number and variety of spices in use, and a person may even need training to fully appreciate them, the more decadence. In any case, the types of garnishes, spices, and condiments continue to abound in our kitchens and eateries until a skyscraper of activity is constructed atop a simple elemental human need, to the point where we are no longer eating to live, but instead we are living to eat. In general, we can identify 3 levels within the natural inclinations. The first level is that of necessity and inevitability. A desire for food or sleep may be extreme for a person who is collapsing from hunger or exhaustion, and satisfying this need is clearly necessary. The second level is that which is necessary for the body to some extent. Whether they do so because of personal habit or societal norms, most people eat and some sleep more than they need to in order to survive. Obviously, a distinction should be made between satisfying vital needs and indulging in a lifestyle of overspending and luxury. The third level is about indulging a need or desire far beyond providing what is lacking, moving into addictive or dysfunctional behavior. Washing dirty hands is necessary, but doing it 20 times an hour indicates a specific disorder. In addition to obsessive actions, there are also obsessive thoughts. The unhealthy part of any inclination, that is, the part that is not its essence, is the evil inclination. It is more difficult for us to discern what the good inclination or conquering the evil inclination consists of. This is because if we develop the ability or the desire within our soul to avoid satisfying basic needs of the body and soul, we may risk endangering our own existence. For example, while there are people who eat more than is necessary, who focus on food and think about it excessively, there are also those who distance themselves from food. Frequently, this does not reflect good character traits and restraint, but is characteristic of an illness. In general, however, an approach of moderation indicates some level of functioning of the good inclination, whose main purpose is to satisfy natural needs without devoting too much time to thinking about them, as dictated by the verse, "The righteous one who eats to the satisfying of his desire, but the belly of the wicked shall lack." There are other inclinations that originate in the body and its desires, and despite the fact that they are not critical to existence, they are important. Sexual desire is not vital to an individual's existence, but it is critical for maintaining the continuity of humankind. The same is true of other urges, such as the need for rest. The question is, to what extent is the inclination necessary and unavoidable? What are its reasonable proportions? And what should be considered excessive? Non-physical inclinations. I need to see where I'm at. Well, we've crossed the barrier I wanted to get to. We're at 79% of the book, and I think that that's probably a good spot to stop until tomorrow. Hopefully you're enjoying this. I find he's going on topics all over, but you got to remember you're dealing with an author who was a great Torah scholar who had a stroke just 2 years prior to writing this book, and I don't know the length of time it took him to write this book, but it was during a period of recovery from stroke. When you consider the great value of Torah study and how a person who could go through such a traumatic stroke still could produce such a work, it's enjoyable, and I find it's touching on a lot of topics, and there's a lot of material, and I can see it's seeded with spots of greatness for sure. Hopefully you're enjoying this. If anybody's got any comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. We will finish this book tomorrow, so if anybody has any suggestions what they may want to hear for next week, starting Monday, we'll be starting another book as well. Haven't decided on what to select, so if you've got a suggestion or there's something you want to hear, I want to make sure that people are getting content they're interested in here on Rocky Mountain Reading. So I try to see if it's available on Kindle. Definitely I've set up this display so that the Kindle fits and you can follow along if you're on a big enough screen. Anyways, I enjoy doing the show, and I hope that you enjoy reading. For me, it's personal time of growth and development, brings lots of thoughts to ideas, and I look forward to hearing more of what he's got to share tomorrow. We'll finish this book tomorrow, and so we'll be back then. And if you've got a suggestion for a follow-up book to this, let me know, and I will see if I can make it happen. So till tomorrow, have a wonderful, wonderful day, everybody. Bye for now.